Daniel Carter stood at the window of Mars Colony's defense control room, his coffee mug warm in his hands. The red landscape stretched endlessly before him, dotted with the shapes of solar panels and communication towers. He took a sip from his mug, noticing how its heavy base could serve as a striking weapon if needed. Every engineer on Mars understood that dual-purpose design wasn't just clever, it was survival. The alert came without warning. First, a soft beep from the defense grid, then a flood of data across his screens. Something big had just appeared near Jupiter's orbit, and it wasn't one of theirs. "Control room, this is Carter," he said into his comm unit. "We have unknown contacts entering the solar system. Multiple signatures, larger than anything in our database." The response was immediate. "Confirmed, Engineer Carter. Stay at your post. Ambassador Wright is being notified." Within hours, the entire solar system was buzzing with activity. The objects, now clearly identified as vessels of non-human origin, had slowed their approach and were broadcasting in multiple frequencies. First contact protocols, drilled into every space worker since training, kicked into action. Linda Wright arrived at the Mars Diplomatic Center just as the first clear messages were being translated. She straightened her formal suit, designed with hidden armor weave that could stop most conventional weapons. Even their clothes, she thought, showed how humanity always prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. "The aliens call themselves the Zarx," her assistant reported. "They're requesting a formal meeting. Their language patterns suggest they're highly civilized and seem peaceful." Linda nodded. "Let's hope they stay that way. Have security do their standard sweeps, but keep it subtle. We don't want to appear hostile." The meeting was set for the next day in Mars Colony's main conference center. Daniel was called in to oversee the facility's defense systems, a precaution that came as naturally to humans as breathing. The Zarx arrived in a shuttle that put human engineering to shame. It landed with perfect precision, hardly disturbing the red dust of Mars. 3 aliens emerged, their bodies tall and sleek, with iridescent skin that seemed to shift colors in the artificial lighting. The first sign of trouble came during the security screening. The Zarx ambassador, who introduced himself as Zeltor, stared in confusion at the standard items Linda's security team carried. "These are weapons," Zeltor said, his translator converting his musical language into English. "No," Linda explained patiently. "These are standard tools. Pens for writing, utensils for eating, maintenance equipment. But they can be used to cause harm," another Zarx, their security expert, pointed out. "This eating tool, it is sharpened. The writing device, it is sturdy enough to pierce flesh. Even your seats are made of materials that could be broken to create weapons." Daniel watched from his security station as Linda tried to explain. "Yes, many of our tools can be used defensively if needed, but that's not their primary purpose. It's just efficient design." The Zarx delegation huddled together, speaking rapidly in their own language. Their color-shifting skin showed patterns that Daniel's systems interpreted as indicating distress. "You mean," Zeltor said slowly, "that all of your species designs things this way? Everything with potential defensive capabilities?" "Not exactly," Linda said, but her words trailed off as she looked around the room. The chairs could indeed be broken for weapons. The table's metal surface could be torn off to make shields. Even the decorative wall panels were rated to stop bullets because, well, why wouldn't they be? The Zarx ambassador's skin shifted to a deep purple. "We have visited 37 spacefaring species. None of them showed this pattern. Your entire civilization is built around the idea that everything might need to be used as a weapon." "It's not about weapons," Daniel spoke up from his post. "It's about being prepared. About survival." Linda shot him a look, but he continued. "Everything we build serves multiple purposes because that's just efficient. A shelter should also be able to defend you. A tool should be sturdy enough to rely on in any situation. It's not about violence. It's about adaptability." The Zarx delegation's skin rippled with new patterns. Their translator struggled to keep up with their rapid conversation. Finally, Zeltor turned back to Linda. "We came here expecting to find another civilization to welcome into the galactic community. Instead, we find—" He paused, searching for the right words. "A species that has turned everything into a potential weapon. Even this meeting room has 4 different defense systems. We can detect them." 5. Actually, Daniel corrected automatically, then winced as Linda glared at him again. "Ambassador Zeltor," Linda said carefully, "I assure you that humanity is peaceful. We're eager to establish diplomatic relations and learn from your people. Our preparedness comes from our history of surviving in harsh conditions, nothing more." But the Zarx were already backing toward their shuttle. "We must consult with our leaders," Zeltor said. "This is unprecedented. You understand that from our perspective, your entire civilization appears to be one giant military installation." "That's not true," Linda protested, but she could see how they might think that. The walls that doubled as shields, the tables that could stop plasma burns, the chairs weighted to be both comfortable and useful as emergency weapons. It was just common sense to humans, but through alien eyes. As the Zarx delegation departed, Daniel approached Linda. "That could have gone better," he said, absently checking that his maintenance tool belt was secure. Like everything else he carried, each tool could serve as a weapon if needed. Linda sighed. "How do you explain to aliens that we don't actually want to fight? We're just prepared. That turning everything into a multi-purpose tool, including defense, is just how we think." "Maybe we don't explain it," Daniel suggested. "Maybe we show them. Let them see how we use these things in daily life. How being prepared doesn't mean being aggressive." Linda watched the Zarx shuttle ascend into the red Martian sky. "If they give us the chance. Right now, they probably think we're the most militant species in the galaxy, and we didn't even show them a single actual weapon." Daniel chuckled. "Just wait until they see how we play sports." As emergency meetings were called and diplomats scrambled to salvage the situation, both Linda and Daniel knew this was just the beginning. Humanity had spent its entire history learning to survive by making every tool, every object, serve multiple purposes. They weren't going to change that just because it made some aliens uncomfortable. The real question was, could they help the Zarx understand that being prepared for anything wasn't the same as being aggressive? As Daniel returned to his station, he realized that this might be humanity's biggest challenge yet. Explaining to advanced aliens why humans saw potential weapons everywhere, not because they wanted to fight, but because they wanted to live. He picked up his coffee mug again, its heavy base and reinforced design familiar in his hand. Sometimes, he thought, a mug was just a mug, and sometimes it was a tool of survival. To humans, there was no contradiction there. Now they just had to help the rest of the galaxy understand that. Amy Reynolds walked through the quiet halls of the Earth Historical Institute, her footsteps echoing off the reinforced walls. As one of humanity's leading historians, she never expected to give a presentation about human history to an alien anthropologist. Yet here she was, preparing to meet with Senva of the Zarx Scientific Council. The alien was already waiting in the research room, its iridescent skin showing patterns of scholarly interest. Unlike the diplomatic team that had visited Mars, Senva seemed more curious than afraid. "Thank you for agreeing to this study, Dr. Reynolds," Senva said through its translator. "Our leaders wish to understand how your species developed this unique approach to tool design." Amy smiled and gestured to the display cases around them. "Let's start at the beginning, shall we? These are some of humanity's earliest tools." She pointed to a stone hand axe. "This was one of our first inventions. Notice how it could be used for cutting meat, shaping wood, digging roots, or as a weapon if needed. Multi-purpose tools were essential for our survival." Senva's skin rippled with understanding. "So this pattern began very early in your development." "Exactly," Amy said. "Look at this ancient farming tool. She brought up a holographic display of a scythe. Our ancestors used it to harvest crops, but it could also defend against threats. The same tool that fed them could protect them. The alien anthropologist moved closer to the display, its sensors taking detailed readings. Fascinating. In most species we've studied, tools and weapons developed as separate categories. Humans never had that luxury, Amy explained. We were never the strongest or fastest species on our planet. We had to be clever, had to make every tool count for multiple purposes. They moved through the exhibits, centuries of human innovation displayed around them. Amy showed how simple cooking pots could be used as helmets, how farming implements became military tools, how every civilization on Earth had developed dual-purpose technologies. But surely, Senva said, its skin showing confusion patterns. Once you achieved technological advancement, this pattern would change. Amy pulled up another display, this one showing modern items. Actually, it became more pronounced. Look at this civilian spacesuit. Its outer layer can become a rigid shelter. Its tools can be used for repairs or defense. Even its waste recycling system can be repurposed to create emergency fuel. Senva's color shifted to a deep blue of concern. Every item serves a potential defensive purpose. Not exactly, Amy corrected. Every item serves multiple purposes, and defense is often one of them. But that's not why we make them this way. It's about efficiency and survival. She brought up images of Mars colony. See these solar panels. They're arranged to collect maximum energy, but their layout also creates defensive positions if needed. The colonists didn't plan it that way for fighting. They planned it that way because why wouldn't you want that extra functionality? The alien scientist spent several minutes processing this information, its skin cycling through various colors. In our studies of your entertainment media, we noticed children's games often involve strategic thinking and physical skills that could be used in combat. Annie nodded. Like capture the flag or dodgeball. Yes, many of our games teach useful skills. It's not about violence. It's about learning coordination, teamwork, and quick thinking. Skills that help in everyday life. But they could be used in combat. Senve insisted. Anything could be used in combat, a new voice said. Both Amy and Senva turned to see Peter Matthews, one of the Institute's security guards, standing in the doorway. Sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't help overhearing. I've been a guard here for 15 years, and you know what saved my life twice. A mop. Senva's skin flickered with surprise. A cleaning tool. Peter nodded. Once to stop someone from falling downstairs, once to keep a door closed during a fire. Never had to use it as a weapon, but I know I could if I had to. That's just how we think. Amy seized on this example. Exactly. When Peter looks at a mop, he doesn't see a weapon. He sees something that can clean floors, stop falls, block doors, reach high places, and yes, be used for defense if there's absolutely no other choice. It's about possibilities. She turned back to the displays. Look at human architecture throughout history. Our homes weren't just shelters. They protected us from weather, wild animals, and yes, sometimes other humans. Our clothes weren't just for warmth. They protected us from the environment and could be repurposed for other needs. Senva spent several hours examining the exhibits, asking detailed questions about human development. Its skin gradually shifted to colors indicating deep thought rather than alarm. I think I begin to understand, it said finally. Your species doesn't intentionally make everything into weapons. You simply evolved seeing everything as a tool with multiple potential uses. Yes, Amy exclaimed. That's exactly it. It's not about looking for weapons. It's about looking for possibilities. Every tool, every object, every design has multiple uses because that's just efficient. Defense is often one of those uses because survival has always been important to us, but it's rarely the primary purpose. The alien scientist made some final notes in its data device. This explains much about your architectural choices. Your buildings are not fortresses, yet they could become fortresses if needed. Your vehicles are not warships, yet they could be adapted for defense. Every human creation follows this pattern, not out of aggression, but out of optimization and creativity. Peter added from his post by the door. Humans are good at looking at things and thinking, what else could this do? Senva's skin showed patterns of academic excitement. This requires further study. Dr. Reynolds, would you be willing to continue these sessions? Our leaders need to understand that this aspect of human nature comes from innovation rather than aggression. Amy smiled. Of course. Though maybe next time we could discuss how humans turn their artistic expressions into communication tools, or how we develop medical techniques from battlefield necessity. The alien's skin rippled with what might have been amusement. Perhaps we should save those topics for after I submit my initial report. Some of my colleagues are still processing the concept of your eating utensils. As Senva left the institute, Amy and Peter watched through the reinforced windows that could become emergency exits if needed. Do you think they'll understand? Peter asked. Amy shrugged. They're scientists. They'll study our history, analyze our development, and hopefully see that humans don't make multi-purpose tools because we want to fight. We make them because we want to live, to solve problems, to be ready for anything life throws at us. She looked at the ancient tools in their displays, each one a testament to human ingenuity and survival. We're not the species that weaponized everything. We're the species that learned to see the potential in everything. Sometimes that potential includes defense, but it always includes hope. Peter Matthews loved his job as head chef on Space Station Unity. The kitchen was his domain, a place where he could create dishes that reminded people of Earth, no matter how far they were from home. He was checking his knife collection when the alarm went off. Security alert in the kitchen area, the station's computer announced. Zarx delegation approaching. Peter looked up from his work, confused. He hadn't heard about any alien visitors today. Through the reinforced window of his kitchen, he saw several Zarx security officers rushing toward his location, their skin flashing morning colors. Samantha Brooks, the station's chief of security, arrived just before the aliens did. She was slightly out of breath, having run from the other side of the station. Pete, she said quickly, the Zarx sensors picked up what they're calling a weapons cache in here. I tried to explain it's just a kitchen, but they're insisting on an inspection. The alien security team entered, their scanning devices humming. The lead officer, whose translator identified him as Kexnar, pointed at Peter's knife rack. These are weapons, Kexnar stated firmly. Many weapons, displayed openly in a food preparation area. Peter blinked in surprise. These are chef's knives. They're for cooking. Look, he reached for one to demonstrate, but the aliens moved back quickly, their skin shifting to alert patterns. Do not touch the weapons, Kexnar ordered. Samantha stepped forward, her hands raised in a calming gesture. Let me explain. These are kitchen tools. Yes, they're sharp, because they need to be sharp to cut food properly. But they're not weapons. They're cooking implements. Another alien officer pointed at the kitchen equipment. This device produces concentrated flame, it said, indicating Peter's cooking torch. And these metal implements could be used as striking weapons. Peter looked at his beloved cooking tools, the heavy rolling pin, the meat tenderizer, the sturdy pots and pans. He suddenly saw them through alien eyes and understood their concern. Everything in here has a specific cooking purpose, he said carefully. The torch is for caramelizing sugar and searing food. The heavy pans are for even heat distribution. The knives are different shapes because different foods need different cuts. The alien scanning devices continued to hum as they moved through the kitchen. They paused at the spice rack, their sensors going wild. These containers hold potentially harmful substances, one officer reported. That's my spice collection. Peter protested. Okay, yes, some spices can be irritants in large quantities, but they're for making food taste good. Here. He reached for a jar of cinnamon, but again the aliens moved back defensively. Samantha noticed the Zarx were getting more agitated. Their skin was showing patterns she'd learned to recognize as increasing alarm. She needed to defuse the situation. "Officers," she said firmly, "I propose a demonstration. With your permission, Chef Matthews can show you exactly how these tools are used in food preparation. Would that help you understand?" The aliens conferred among themselves, their skin rippling with patterns of uncertainty and curiosity. Finally, Kexnar nodded. "We will observe," he said, "but we maintain our right to intervene if we perceive any threatening actions." Peter smiled. "How about I make you some Earth-style stir-fry? You can watch every step." He moved slowly, explaining each tool as he used it. "This cleaver is designed to cut vegetables quickly and evenly," he said, demonstrating on a carrot. "The weight and shape make it perfect for precise cuts." The aliens watched in fascination as Peter worked. Their sensors remained active, but their skin patterns slowly shifted from alarm to interest as they saw how each weapon was used to create food. The high heat and quick movements of stir-frying were developed by Earth cultures to cook food efficiently while preserving nutrients, Peter explained as he worked the wok. The shape of the pan helps distribute heat evenly. One of the younger Zarx officers moved closer, its skin showing patterns of curiosity. "Your cooking methods seem very energetic," it observed. Peter laughed. "You should see what we call flambe. But maybe we'll save that demonstration for another day." As the vegetables and proteins sizzled in the wok, amazing smells filled the kitchen. Even the Zarx, with their different biology, seemed to appreciate the aromas. "Notice how each tool has a specific purpose in the cooking process," Samantha pointed out. "The knife's shape determines the texture of the food. The wok's material affects how the heat spreads. Everything is designed to make the food better. But they could all be used as weapons," Kexnar insisted, though his skin patterns showed less certainty now. "So could anything," Peter said, plating the stir-fry. "A pen could be a weapon. A chair could be a weapon. But that's not why we make them. We make them to write, to sit, or in this case, to cook good food that brings people together." He offered the finished dishes to the aliens. Though they couldn't eat human food, their sensors analyzed the preparation process with great interest. "Your species puts significant effort into food preparation," one officer noted. "These tools are more sophisticated than they appear." "Cooking is one of our oldest arts," Peter explained. "It's about nurturing, not harming. Yes, a chef's knife could be used as a weapon, but that would be a waste of a perfectly good knife. Its purpose is to help create something positive." As the inspection wrapped up, the Zarx seemed less alarmed, though still cautious. Kexnar made his final report. "We classify this as a food preparation facility with high-risk tools," he stated, "but we acknowledge these tools serve a primary non-combat purpose." After the aliens left, Samantha helped Peter clean up. "Well, that was exciting," she said. "Though I think you actually helped them understand something important about humans." "What's that?" "That just because we can use something as a weapon doesn't mean we want to. Give a human a knife, and they're more likely to cook you dinner than start a fight." Peter looked around his kitchen, at all the tools that had suddenly been seen as weapons. "Maybe that's what makes us different," he said. "We don't see weapons everywhere. We see possibilities everywhere. Sometimes those possibilities include defense, but mostly they include creating, building, and in my case, feeding people." Samantha nodded. "Let's just hope the Zarx don't visit the sports complex next. Trying to explain why humans intentionally throw balls at each other might be a bit more challenging." "One step at a time," Peter said, returning to his cooking. "One meal at a time." Richard Cooper knew something was wrong with Earth's satellite network. As the lead engineer at the Global Communications Center, he could tell when signals weren't behaving normally. For the past week, small delays and strange patterns had been showing up in the data. "Nicole, take a look at this," He called to his colleague. Nicole Martinez, the center's chief science officer, walked over to his monitoring station. Her eyes narrowed as she studied the readings. "Those patterns aren't random," she said quietly. "Someone's interfering with our communications." Richard nodded. "And I think I know who. Look at the energy signatures." He pulled up another screen showing detailed scans. They matched the Zarx ships in orbit. Nichols' face grew serious. "They're trying to limit our communications. That's a hostile act." "I don't think they see it that way," Richard said, typing quickly to bring up more data. "Based on these readings, they're trying to add delays to our military and emergency response channels. They probably think they're making us safer by slowing down our ability to react." The problem was, human communication systems didn't work the way the Zarx thought they did. Every civilian satellite could switch to emergency protocols if needed. Every commercial communication channel had backup military capabilities built in. It wasn't because humans were warlike. It was because they believed in being prepared. "We need to report this," Nicole said, reaching for her communicator. But before she could activate it, all the screens in the control room suddenly went dark. Emergency lights came on immediately. Richard's fingers flew across his backup keyboard, which worked without power because it was mechanical. "They're trying to shut us down," he said, "but they don't understand how we build things." Nicole was already pulling panels off the wall, exposing the manual controls underneath. "Emergency protocols activated," she announced. Switching to backup systems. The Zarx had assumed turning off the power would disable Earth's communications. They didn't realize that humans had built their systems with layer upon layer of backups, each one capable of working independently. "Getting reports from other stations," Richard said, reading from his emergency display. "The Zarx are trying to disable all major communication hubs. They think they're preventing us from coordinating any military response. But they're actually causing exactly what they're afraid of," Nicole said. She pointed to the emergency alerts popping up on their screens. All across Earth and its colonies, humans were switching to emergency modes, activating backup systems, and preparing for the worst. In orbit, the Zarx ships were probably congratulating themselves on neutralizing Earth's military communications. They didn't realize that every civilian phone could now become a military comm unit. Every commercial satellite was switching to defense protocols. Every household computer was joining the emergency network. "They still don't understand us," Richard said, watching the backup systems come online. "They think by taking away our military tools, they'll make us less dangerous. But everything we build has backup purposes." Nicole nodded, her hands moving quickly over the manual controls. "Everything can be repurposed if needed. Not because we want to fight, but because we need to survive." The situation grew more tense as hours passed. The Zarx continued their attempts to restrict human technology, and humans kept finding ways around their restrictions. It wasn't even difficult. All the backup systems were already in place, built in from the beginning. "Look at this," Richard said, pointing to new data coming in. "They're trying to disable our weather satellites now. They probably think they're strategic military assets. Don't they realize every civilian car has a weather sensor?" Nicole asked. "Every smartphone can measure atmospheric conditions. We built redundancy into everything because weather is important, not because we're planning for war." But the Zarx didn't understand. They saw humanity's habit of building backup systems and multiple-use technology as proof of military planning. They didn't realize it was just how humans thought about technology. A new alert flashed across their screens. The Zarx were now targeting power grids. But again, they didn't understand human design philosophy. Every neighborhood had backup generators. Every major building had independent power systems. Even many homes had solar panels and batteries. "They're going to trigger every emergency system we have," Richard said, watching the alerts multiply. "Not because we're attacking them, but because their actions match every disaster scenario we've planned for." Nicole was coordinating with other centers through their backup channels. Everyone switching to emergency protocols. Not because we want to fight, but because that's what these systems were designed for, keeping people safe when main systems fail. The Zarx ships in orbit must have been confused by what they were seeing. Instead of disabled and helpless, human civilization was adapting, switching to backup systems, finding new ways to communicate and function. New message from the Zarx, Richard announced, reading from his screen. They're demanding we shut down our military backup systems. They still think these are weapon systems we're activating. Nicole shook her head. How do we explain that these aren't military systems? They're just human systems. We build everything to work in emergencies because emergencies happen. Richard thought about this as he worked. The Zarx saw humanity's preparation for disasters as preparation for war. They didn't understand that humans had learned to build backup systems into everything because their history was full of natural disasters, accidents, and challenges that had nothing to do with fighting. Look at how they're targeting our systems, he said. They're following a military logic, trying to disable what they think are our weapons. But they're actually just interfering with everyday life, which is causing exactly the response they're afraid of. Nicole nodded. Because when you interfere with human systems, backup systems activate automatically, not to fight, but to protect people and keep things working. As the day continued, the situation grew more serious. The Zarx kept trying to restrict human technology, and humans kept adapting, using backup systems, finding new ways to communicate and function. It wasn't about fighting. It was about survival and keeping society running. They need to understand, Richard said, watching the emergency systems work exactly as designed. Everything we build has multiple purposes and backup systems because that's just good design. It's not about weapons. It's about making sure things keep working no matter what happens. Nicole looked at the data showing how human civilization was adapting to the Zarx interference. Maybe that's what they need to learn about us. We don't build things to fight. We build things to survive. And right now, they're forcing us to prove just how good we are at survival. Richard nodded, his hand still moving over his controls. Let's hope they figure it out soon. Because right now, they're not making us less dangerous. They're just proving why we were right to build everything with backup systems in the first place. Ryan Sullivan was teaching his regular civilian defense class when the Zarx began their containment action. As alarms sounded through the Luna Base Training Center, he watched his students automatically move into emergency positions, just as they'd practiced. Remember, he called out, anything can be a tool. Everything has multiple uses. These weren't soldiers he was teaching. They were ordinary civilians, teachers, engineers, office workers, people who wanted to be prepared for emergencies. The base shook as Zarx ships moved into position above them. Their weapons weren't designed to destroy. They were trying to disable what they saw as military targets. But the aliens still didn't understand how humans built things. The Zarx think they're being careful, Ryan explained to his class as they moved to the safety zones. They're using weapons designed to shut down military systems. But what do we know about human buildings? Everything has backup systems, his students replied in unison, just as another shockwave hit the base. The aliens were targeting what they thought were weapon systems. But on a base built by humans, everything was built to serve multiple purposes. The hallways weren't just corridors. They were emergency shelter zones. The classroom walls weren't just walls. They were shield panels that could absorb energy weapons. Ryan's communicator buzzed. It was Samantha Brooks, the security officer from Unity Station. Ryan, the Zarx are hitting every major human settlement. They think they're being precise, targeting only military capabilities. But everything we build has military capabilities built in, Ryan finished. Not because we want to fight, but because we believe in being prepared. He watched as his students automatically began converting their classroom into an emergency center. Tables turned into barricades, not because they were weapons, but because they were designed to be sturdy enough to serve as shelter if needed. Chairs became support structures, their seemingly simple design revealing hidden strength. "Look at how your students are responding," Samantha said through the comm. "The Zarx probably think you've trained them as soldiers." Ryan shook his head. "I've trained them to survive. There's a difference." He helped a young office worker adjust her grip on a support beam. The beam looked decorative, but like everything humans built, it had multiple purposes. The Zarx weapons continued to hit the base, trying to disable what they thought were military systems. But they didn't understand that humans didn't separate military and civilian technology. Everything was built to work in emergencies. Everything had backup systems. Everything could serve multiple purposes. "They're trying to shut down our power," reported one of Ryan's students, an electrical engineer named Alice. "But they don't realize every section has independent power cells. We build redundancy into everything." "Not just redundancy," Ryan corrected. "Adaptability. Show me what you've learned about improvising tools." His students moved quickly, showing how ordinary objects could serve emergency purposes. A tablet computer became a signal mirror. A belt became a tool holder. A simple pen could write, sure, but it was also sturdy enough to use as a small lever or emergency support. The Zarx ships above them were probably wondering why their careful strikes weren't working as planned. They could shut down main power, but emergency lights came on instantly. They could block main communications, but backup channels opened immediately. They could target defense systems, but they didn't realize that in human construction, everything was part of the defense system. "Status report from Earth," Samantha's voice came through again. "The Zarx are pulling back, confused. Their sensors show that despite their precise strikes, human capabilities haven't been reduced at all." Ryan smiled. "Of course not. They don't understand that we don't build things with single purposes. Everything in this room can be used for survival if needed. Not because we're warriors, but because we're survivors." He looked at his students, ordinary civilians who knew how to turn everyday objects into survival tools. The Zarx thought this made humans dangerous. They didn't understand it made humans resilient. A new alert sounded. The Zarx were changing tactics. Instead of targeting what they thought were military systems, they were now trying to understand why their careful plan wasn't working. "They're scanning the base's structure," Alice reported, looking at her monitors. "Their sensors must be going crazy trying to understand our building methods." Ryan nodded. "Every wall reinforced but not weaponized. Every door strong enough to be a shield but designed for daily use. Every piece of furniture stable enough to use as cover. Not because we want to fight, but because we want to live." His students finished with him. The base shook again, but this time it was different. The Zarx weren't attacking. They were testing, trying to understand why human structures weren't behaving like they expected. "Look at their scan patterns," Alice said. "They're finally figuring it out. Everything we build has multiple layers, multiple purposes, not because we're preparing for war, but because we're preparing for anything." Ryan finished. "That's what they need to understand. We don't build things to be weapons. We build things to be useful in any situation." The attacks had stopped completely now. The Zarx ships hung in Luna's sky, their sensors still scanning, trying to understand what they were seeing. Every human settlement they targeted had responded the same way. Not by fighting back, but by adapting, by using their environment in ways the aliens hadn't thought possible. "Message from Earth Command," Samantha reported. "The Zarx are requesting a meeting. I think they finally want to understand rather than contain." Ryan looked around his classroom. His students were already converting it back from an emergency shelter to a teaching space. The tables that could serve as barricades were once again just tables. The chairs that could support emergency structures were just chairs again. "That's what makes us different," he said to his class. "We don't see weapons everywhere. We see possibilities everywhere. Sometimes those possibilities include defense, but mostly they're about living, learning, and growing." As his students began to relax, Ryan thought about what the Zarx had learned today. They came expecting to find a dangerous species that had weaponized everything. Instead, they found a species that had learned to see the potential in everything, not for war, but for survival. "Maybe now they'll understand," he said to Samantha through the comm. "We don't make everything into a weapon. We make everything useful. There's a difference." The Zarx ships above Luna were still scanning, still learning. But they weren't attacking anymore. Perhaps they'd finally realized that trying to contain humans wasn't the answer. Understanding them was. Karen Phillips stood in the New Earth Zarx Cultural Exchange Center, watching humans and aliens interact with growing comfort. As chief mediator for human-alien relations, she had spent the last month helping both species understand each other better. The center, built jointly by both species, showed signs of both human and Zarx design philosophy. "Notice how they built this room," she said to Zeltor, the Zarx ambassador who had first discovered humanity's unique approach to tool design. "The walls are strong enough to resist damage, but not because we expect fighting. It's because good construction should last." Zeltor's skin showed patterns of understanding that Karen had learned to read. "Yes, we're beginning to see the difference. You don't build things to be weapons. You build things to be useful in any situation." They walked through the center, passing displays that showed human history alongside Zarx culture. In one room, Peter Matthews, the chef from Unity Station, was teaching a cooking class to a mixed group of humans and Zarx. "See these kitchen tools," Peter was saying, holding up a heavy pan. "Yes, they're sturdy enough to use for defense if needed. But that's not why we make them this way. We make them sturdy so they'll heat evenly and last a long time." The Zarx student's skin showed patterns of interest rather than fear now. They had learned that humans' multi-purpose designs came from practical thinking, not warlike intentions. Karen and Zeltor moved to another room where Amy Reynolds, the historian, was sharing stories with Senva, the Zarx scientist. They were discussing how humans had learned to adapt everyday items during natural disasters. "When the great storms hit our coastal cities," Amy explained, "people used their furniture to build temporary shelters. They used cooking pots to carry clean water. They turned their clothes into filters and bandages. Not because these things were weapons, but because humans are good at finding new uses for familiar objects." Senva's skin showed academic excitement. "This explains so much about your development. Your species learned to survive by making everything serve multiple purposes." In the center's main hall, Richard Cooper and Nicole Martinez had set up a display showing how human communication systems worked. They were explaining to a group of Zarx engineers why humans built so many backup systems. "It's not about military planning," Richard said, pointing to a diagram. "It's about making sure people can call for help if they need it. It's about keeping families connected during emergencies. It's about survival, not fighting." Karen smiled as she watched the Zarx engineers' skin patterns shift from confusion to understanding. They were finally seeing that human technology wasn't built for war, it was built for life. In the training area, Ryan Sullivan was demonstrating civilian emergency preparedness to a mixed class of humans and Zarx. But now, instead of seeing it as combat training, the aliens understood it was about saving lives. "In an emergency," Ryan explained, "knowing how to use everyday objects in new ways can keep you alive. It's not about fighting. It's about surviving whatever life throws at you." Samantha Brooks, who had helped during the crisis at Unity Station, joined Karen and Zeltor as they observed the class. "The Zarx were right about one thing," Samantha said. "Humans did weaponize everything. But they were wrong about why. We don't do it because we want to fight. We do it because we want to live." Zeltor's skin showed a pattern that Karen had learned meant deep thought. "We came expecting to find a dangerous species that had turned everything into weapons. Instead, we found a species that had learned to see the potential in everything." "That's exactly it," Karen agreed. "Humans don't see weapons everywhere. We see possibilities everywhere. Sometimes those possibilities include defense, but mostly they're about solving problems and helping each other. They walked to the center's garden, where humans and Zarx were working together to grow plants from both worlds. The tools they used were typical human designs, sturdy, multi-purpose, built to last. "Look at these gardening tools," Karen said, picking up a trowel. "Yes, they're strong enough to use as weapons if someone had to, but their real purpose is to help things grow. That's what humans do. We build things that help life flourish." Zeltor watched a young human teaching a Zarx child how to plant seeds. "We were afraid of your species because everything you build could be used as a weapon. Now we understand that everything you build is meant to preserve and protect life." "That's the key difference," Karen said. "We don't build things with the intention of fighting. We build things with the intention of living, of solving problems, of being ready for whatever challenges we might face." As the day ended, Karen stood with Zeltor in the center's observation dome, watching Earth's sunset. The dome itself was typical of human construction, beautiful but strong, designed to protect while serving its primary purpose of offering a view of space. "Your species surprised us," Zeltor admitted, his skin showing honest reflection. "We thought you were dangerous because you could turn anything into a weapon. Now we understand that you're remarkable because you can turn anything into a tool for survival." Karen nodded. "That's humanity's real strength. Not that we can fight with anything, but that we can survive with anything. We don't see weapons everywhere. We see solutions everywhere." Around them, humans and Zarx continued to work together, learn from each other, and build understanding. The very center they stood in was proof of how humans could work with others, adapting and growing while staying true to their nature. "Perhaps," Zeltor said, his skin showing hope patterns, "this is why your species was meant to join the galactic community. Not despite your ability to see defensive potential in everything, but because of your ability to see potential in everything." Karen smiled. "We're not the species that weaponized everything. We're the species that learned to see the possibilities in everything. Sometimes those possibilities include defense, but they always include hope." As night fell over the Earth-Zarx Cultural Exchange Center, both species continued their work of building understanding. The humans hadn't changed their way of designing things. They still made everything sturdy, adaptable, and multi-purpose. But now the Zarx understood that this wasn't about war or weapons. It was about life, survival, and the human drive to be ready for anything while hoping for the best.